Yes, and Dr. Attz, good
Good
afternoon to
afternoon.
everyone, especially David, who I'm ashamed to say gave me a quick call, but my cell phone is obviously telling the wrong time because I was very calm. And then he told me, Karen, you know it's 4:15 and your guest is there already. So I apologize to you. I apologize to the listeners. And I'll have to recalibrate, as the fancy word, my phone because obviously it's telling the wrong time. But thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You said to us that you'd be joining us via audio, and you explained to me the reason. But we're very happy to have you on. And in fact, let me just
Thank
do
you
the.
for inviting me, and good evening to all of your listeners
You're looking too
from
marvelous.
Trinidad
You're
and
looking too
Tobago.
good. You're looking. You're looking too good. I don't like that picture. Scrap
That's
it.
why I just put up a picture.
I understand. I'm about to start doing that. Okay, so let me be more get to the point, right? To understand who Dr. Marlene Attz is. I mean, I think you should know the name because, in fact, just now, one of the reasons that kept me back a little bit, I went and I was looking up a particular point which I wanted to speak to, and you were being quoted in it actually, just by chance. I wasn't looking for you. I was looking for the topic, and they quoted you. That's how well known you are in the field of economics. So you are Dr. Marlene Attz, PhD in economics for more than 20 years. So no one would believe that. You've been an economist, and your area of research is one of the reasons we're very happy to have you on, is economic development opportunities and challenges in Caribbean countries. Of course, we're going to focus on the Caribbean country of Trinidad and Tobago. You have also been a consultant for the Caribbean Development Bank, the UNDP, the IDB. So, and you sit on boards, insurance boards, etc. So you have clearly made not only a name for yourself, but highly respected name for yourself. I know we spoke earlier, had a short conversation, and I was told by someone a few weeks ago that Karen, and the person actually said to me on the show, but what kind of interview is this? What kind of interview is this? You alone speaking? Anyhow, it is not, as I said, it's going to be a conversation, but I really want you to take the lead. And there's so much you can talk about, I know, but I can just give you some of the things I would like you to use your knowledge and break it down for the man in the street, because sometimes, lawyers, we used to say, you use legalese or legal mumbo jumbo. That is to increase your fees. That's not true of economists, of course. So the areas I wanted to address were the issue of poverty, your famous statement where you were quoted as having said that 300,000 people in Trinidad and Tobago are living for about $980 something a month, which was shocking to me. I thought obviously the roll-on effect of inflation and what kind of inflation we have, and of course the trade unions now calling for a minimum wage of $30. It's $17.50. But what I do know, maybe I'll let you go into the where it then goes outside of the Minimum Wage Act, and therefore the provisions of the act do not apply once the salary is over X amount per hour. But I'll let you go into that. So we could start with that. But I certainly also want you to explain to the public unemployment and transfer subsidies. What a lot of stuff. But let's start with, what a lot of stuff. But I know you are more than capable. So let's start with your statement that was quoted in the papers about how many people are living on this 989. Were we to
Actually,
take it literally? Mm-hmm.
actually, we thanks for inviting me and for the opportunity. I always like to chat to my fellow Trinbagonians so that I can understand, what is happening on the ground, and also try to share some information in a way that I think is digestible and palatable. People may not always like to hear it, but I think it's important. I feel strongly about having a public that understands what is happening around us. It's one of my passions, and it's one of the things that drives me to do what I do on a day-to-day basis, trying to help people understand where we are so that when confronted with voices from other spaces, you can at least have some sense of what people are saying and how it impacts on you as an individual and impacts on your family, etc., etc. So having said that, let me just the quote on poverty. I was actually quoting Kyrie consultants who did a poverty study. I think that is data from 2014 from a poverty study that they did in Trinidad and Tobago, where they identified that 300,000 persons at that time were living at just under $1,000, in Trinidad and Tobago. So it was really—
What year was that?
It's a 2014 study done by Kyrie Consultants.
And when was the poverty? I knew it to be $15, and it was changed to $17.15 in what year? 2010.
The minimum wage was changed, was increased to $17.50. I think it was. We can check on that quickly.
2010, I believe. No, by an order.
I
don't
think
know.
so. I'm not too sure, but
an event.
But the fact is, in Trinidad and Tobago, the fact remains that we have, okay, so the minimum wage increased from $15 to $17.50 in 2019. In 2019, according to a quick search done in the Ministry of Labor's site. The fact is that we have a sense in the absence of data. So it's, a lot of things swirling around in that conversation around poverty. The fact of the matter is that we do not have data that helps us understand what is the reality in Trinidad and Tobago. What we have is anecdotal information. So in COVID-19 in 2020, March 2020, when the major crisis impacted on us, we know that a lot of people were displaced, and we know that the Ministry of Social Development would have given out X amounts of social relief grants, etc., etc. And I think that is often used as a proxy indicator for what is happening in the country. So that's one point that I want to park there. The second point I want to park is that we are supposed to be having a household budgetary survey being done in Trinidad and Tobago. That was announced in the last budget, I think, or the budget before. It was announced within the last year. And that is meant to be ongoing. And that household budgetary survey is supposed to give you a sense of what is happening throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore use those data, the data that is collected, gathered from that household budgetary survey, use those data to then inform government policy, including, to my mind, conversations around how you will increase utility rates, because you will then know that X percentage of your population is living in this kind of household circumstance and therefore cannot afford to pay an increase of a rate of X amount, so they can be exempted. You will also then know what kinds of houses people live in, so that you can then perhaps think about how you're going to apply things like the property tax, because you will then realize that X numbers of persons are renting, X number of persons are living in different kinds of household circumstances, because we know, again, anecdotally and some historical data, that you have extended families, for example, and you might have a family that is managed by grandparents, so they're on fixed incomes. They might have young children, grandchildren that they're looking after. So the household budgetary survey, I think, and the survey of living conditions, those two surveys give you a sense of what is happening throughout your country, your social and economic demographics, your social and economic profiles throughout the country. And those data then help you either craft policy to deal with things like poverty alleviation, because you will also then know how many people are poor, how many people are indigent, how many children are not going to school, what might be their circumstances, if they have access to electricity, if they have access to potable water, etc., etc. So it gives you a sense of how you can make appropriate interventions from a policy level to improve the conditions under which people live.
Sorry, yeah. I forgot to do this at the very beginning. So, let us say, so a little bit frazzled that I was, that I had to get a call from David. So I'll ask David to kindly let the listening, and some of them are viewing, and they see your beautiful face, on the screen, and I'm going to make sure I get a picture like that and let them have that to look at. Um, the numbers, David, that people can call in at any time to take part in the conversation. David?
Okay. Yes, folks, you can call us at 222-8255. That's 222-8255. 612-8255. 612-8255. And our toll-free number, 866-525-1099. 866-525-1099. Ladies?
Yeah. And just want to take a little turn on the poverty issue, a topic a little bit. And also to say that I've met people who say they listen to the show, says, why you don't call in? I don't know, anyhow, please call in. We want to hear you. The issue of poverty, how do you measure poverty? That is, I think, is the beginning of the discussion. United States uses the dollar per day measurement, which is really not a realistic measurement when we're living in a country like United States where tertiary education is not free. There are many, many adults still trying to pay off their student debt, where medical care is not free, where the taxes, both federal, local, etc. taxes, are very expensive, and the cost of medication is also extremely high. The cost of transportation, right? So when I was minister, yes, the reason why I am so attached to the topic of the poverty, because at that point in time, obviously the opposition wanted to paint Trinidad in a very gloomy light and to talk about the level of poverty. I said, well, what is poverty? Are we going to continue to adopt what the United States says is poverty? So Cubans are living in dire poverty, but they have free education, the best medical. I'm not saying that things are perfect, best medical. Are you going to say that if you had to add that to your bill, HDC housing, how many people in Trinidad enjoy HDC housing and don't pay it and don't get evicted for many, many years? How many of persons are on CDAP? And I'm talking about people who I know are upper middle class, who are on medication for cancer medication, which it will cost them thousands of dollars, literally, if they had to pay for it. How many people get free medical care, the little bit of money that we have to pay? And, and I feel strongly about it, because if you go on the National Health NHS site, every single problem that we talk about, a shortage of beds. I'm not making excuses for Trinidad or for the minister. We probably happy to hear me say this. The shortage of beds, the burnout of staff, underpayment, the using of all these foreign doctors as junior doctors. And in fact, I think it's Royal College of Surgeons just recently, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, to get into a consultancy program, they had to admit that while they preach diversity, 52% of the students who got into these programs were white British persons, and they knew something was wrong. So all I'm saying to you is that when we talk about things, why do we need to always use what they say is the measurement of poverty? Because our poverty is not their poverty. Children, I go and help out at a school. The children get free lunches at the school. I know in America they do. But guess what? They talk about feeding America's hungry. What do you have feeding America's hungry? Why you have 10 cities in America? Why you have that, the richest country in the world? So when we talk about poverty, I think we have to be careful not to just, and I did have that, I hope he doesn't mind me calling his name, because I used to turn to him a lot in the early days, Dr. Carl Theodore, and discuss this very same topic with him, because I'd have to talk about it in Parliament. And I would say, how are we measuring poverty when our health care is free? It's not fantastic, neither is it in England or in America. Education up to tertiary education. Do you know in Jamaica, when you get into secondary school, you have to pay for secondary school? In Jamaica, you start paying. Any school you go to, you pay for secondary school, and you have HCC housing. There are so many things that at the end of the day, house, shelter, food, so the subsidies on so many food items. I mean, I'm not defending the government, but I am defending Trinidad and Tobago. And I think it is really unfair and short-sighted and myopic on our part to decide that poverty is to be measured by what the US says is a measurement of poverty, when it really is not an accurate measurement, when there's so many things that go into what you call someone being able to, yes, and have shelter, food, and so on, which is done by this government. Of anybody over 60, I mean, get real. And electricity and water, and just let me finish with electricity and water. They do get a discount. Those persons who burn or do not use more than X amount of electricity. I have someone living in my building who I would consider to be very wealthy, and her electricity bill is below whatever is the amount, whatever it is, whatever the threshold is, and she gets the benefit of that. Well, that's because she's being frugal. So they do recognize and they do target households that have limited means in terms of giving them subsidies for water, giving them subsidies for electricity. They do target them. Of course, people take advantage. So, and the last point on that is this: why do you think we are going to be competitive in the Caribbean in selling our goods and services, goods all up the Caribbean islands? Because for the manufacturers, yes, they may pay a commercial, but it's nothing compared to what you pay in Barbados. Or they can't compete with us because our water and electricity, key factors, are heavily subsidized, which all countries do. Europe does it, America does it. Why they don't talk the truth? They all do it, right? Yeah. So if you have to find a more targeted approach and a more rationalized approach, yes, tell me that. But don't tell me because I subsidize in water and electricity. Yes, maybe they need to target it more. But we benefit, our manufacturing sector benefits from that. So that whole conversation about poverty has to have a complete restart and not just talk about how much dollars per month. Although, of course, that's helpful, of course.
I think if I mean, you touched on several, as you were unpacking it there, you touched on several things. Including the question of the subsidies. And yes, we have enjoyed for many years the benefit of the revenues government earns from oil and gas, because our electricity, our healthcare system, even the homes that some people, the HBC homes, as you mentioned, the fact that you're paying a lower than market rental rate or lease rate or mortgage rate is a reflection of, some subsidies that would have gone inside of there to help the citizens essentially sharing the wealth over the years. But I want to get back to the central issue about the poverty measurement. Now, I agree with you that there needs to be essentially not quite a homegrown approach, but something that is reflective of the circumstances of different countries. So poverty in Trinidad and Tobago may not look or feel like poverty in South Sudan, or may not look like and feel like poverty in Mississippi in the United States. And the fact that there is a dollar value associated with it allows for comparisons between and among countries. Now, whether or not we're comparing the right set of things between and among countries is a different conversation. But I just wanted to throw into the mix that there is something called a multidimensional poverty index, which covers things like healthcare in terms of, and when I say health, the generic headline is health, but it looks at things like child mortality, nutrition rates, malnutrition, etc., etc. It covers education, including years of schooling, the extent to which you actually go to school or can't go to school because of particular sets of circumstances, living standards measured in terms of access to sanitation, drinking water, potable water, electricity, etc., etc., and what you have inside of there. And then if you wish, just to be, a little provocative, to throw in that mix, how do you say that 300,000 persons, and I'm not discounting, this was 2014, I'm not discounting what the consultants would have found, but fast forward to where we are, where you and I imagine all of your listeners and viewers know that every household, every 1.4 million person in this country actually has a cell phone.
Yeah.
So how do you include
what is a necessity? Nobody has a home phone anymore. It's been
people have mobile phones. But
Yeah, they don't have residential and mobile. They
so
have
so
mobile.
so
So it's
so
not
so
both. It's only
we have
one.
to look when we look at the number of new cars that are on the road on a regular basis, etc. Not only the luxury cars, but the fact that you find several persons in Trinidad and Tobago owning a vehicle. So I do agree that there is need for a conversation around what are we really trying to measure when we talk about poverty in our specific circumstance. And that was the point I'm making in terms of the household budgetary survey. I was not advocating. I think
No,
the
no, no.
dollar value simply allows for
Mm.
comparison. But I think when it comes down to honing in on where we need to make policy interventions, we need to understand what is the lay of the land so that we can make appropriate policy interventions.
Yeah, I wasn't, Dr. Attz, I wasn't making that statement in vacuum or like that. It's because, as I said, probably like have to defend the government's position with
Occupational hazard.
poverty. No, but
Occupational
no, it
hazard.
was not a hazard for me. I enjoyed every minute of it because I had people who I respected a lot and who were willing to help me and explain and who encouraged me in my way of thinking. And I did say I did mention Dr. Theodore's name. And I said to him, but you see, part of it is used, but you see, well, that's the politician in me. The United States loves to use that to say that Cubans earn $1 a day. Yeah, but they
That's
don't
right.
want you to tell.
Yeah.
They
Yes.
love to
Because
tell you that. They
geopolitically,
love to sell you about the $1 a
it
day
makes
because
sense. But
they do that.
they ignore the fact that they have top tier
Yeah, but they do
mental
that. It's
stability.
political. It's political. So that you
Yeah.
sit down there thinking, my God, they $1 who can live on. No, you can't live on $1 a day in America. That's for sure. But so it's an unfair comparison. All I'm saying is that we need to have enough confidence in ourselves to create our own measurements. And in fact, when I was doing the research on the issue, there were other measurements they were using. I just wanted to make that point on it. And the government might be very happy to hear Karen Nunez-Tesheira say that. And you mentioned something else, which I wanted to go to, which flows right into the next thing, which has me, kept me back a little bit, but actually it's a quotation you also gave in that article. It was by Asha Javid, and they were talking about transfers and subsidies and the percentage of expenditure, how much of the government's expenditure goes into transfers and subsidies. But the first thing that people, I'm not calling names, but if he's listening, he knows I'm talking about him. There are some people who love to talk about recurrent expenditure, transfer and subsidies, government spending money. What are they doing on capital expenditure? Oh God, they love to talk that. And you know who is the boogeyman in that? I have to support them. The PNM, the worst government, transfers and subsidies. So I just want to say for those who are listening, I went and looked up this, and then I would like you as the economist to define what a transfer is and what a subsidy is, the definition of it is, and then let us disaggregate them and see if what you're saying is fair. Because you are doing as though those who say it, transfer and subsidies, you know what they're making you think? Oh God, this person who don't want to work, we have to be giving them money. We want this one who didn't want to work, we have to get them senior citizen grant. Oh, this one wanted and throwing away money instead of invested in capital expenditure. I'm not saying there is not a point. I'm going to write out some of the data, which I'm sure he will appreciate that because he loves to talk about transfers and subsidies. So I will just give you the percentage I have found, and then I will give you the pleasure to tell me what is a transfer and subsidy, as I found out, and also quoting from you in the article. And from 2003, when you went to 2003, 29.6 of the government's expenditure went into transfers and subsidies. Let me fast forward a little bit. 2009, it was 45%. 2014, let me take, no, because we love to talk about certain governments. 2012, 40.8, 2013, 42.9, 2014, 40, actually it's saying 44.6. I believe that might be more correct. 2015, 41.7, 2018, actually went down really low. In 2018, it was 33.4. I can't believe that. 2019, it was 53%, and we're about 53% of our government's expenditures, revenue is spent on transfer subsidies. But I will ask you to define what is a transfer and a subsidy, and what would constitute a transfer subsidy, because I find it it's very misleading to just spout those two words as if we live in a a country where the government is only taking all the earnings from revenues that we earn and just putting it on not only recurring expenditure, but in unreasonable and wasteful recurring expenditure. So could you tell our audience what is a transfer and a
All right. So
subsidy?
let me take it from the top. In terms of the transfer payments are essentially those payments. Okay, let me take it another direction. If I work at my job for a week or for a month or for a fortnight, I get a payment at the end of that period, and that is a payment in return for services that I have provided. So my labor, I am paid for that at the end of a particular period. Transfer payments, however, are transfer payments made by government to individuals in the first instance. So our pensions are transfer payments at $3,500 because there is no service associated to the government. I mean, we recognize the contribution that our senior citizens would have played over the years, and the government makes these transfer payments in the form of their pensions on a monthly basis. You have the social grants, like your disability grants and the other grants that come out from the Ministry of Social Development. There is no service associated with that. It is the lawyer in you, ex gratia payment that the government essentially makes available to citizens who, for one reason or the other, the government determines that these people need some kind of support. So either your pensioners, the persons who are getting disability grants, the other kind of social grants that are given out by the Ministry of Social Development. That's one form of the transfer payment. The subsidy, on the other hand, is where the government decides that a particular organization or entity, because of the nature of the services they're providing to the government, if they were to provide those services at market prices, it will not be within the range of affordability of the average citizen. So the government essentially supports those organizations and subsidizes their operations. So you would have heard about subsidies being provided to many state enterprises. So subsidies being provided by the government to Caribbean Airlines, for example, subsidies being provided to Caribbean Airlines so that the cost of traveling to Tobago is X amount of dollars, but that doesn't represent the market, the real cost of travel between Trinidad and Tobago. The government is essentially providing some support to the airline. And there's some other state enterprises that have in fact continue to receive support from the government. So WASA is inside of there, Caribbean Airlines, TNTech, et cetera, and there have been conversations on the government side to essentially roll back the extent, the amount of support that they're giving to these state enterprises so that they can become more economically viable, essentially taking away some of the support that the government is providing. And of course, what is going to then happen is that we, the consumers, the average Trinbagonian, is then going to have to face the market price of some of these goods and services if and when the subsidies are in fact removed from those enterprises.
Well, or reduce. So again, this is the politician in me looking. Genuinely, I won't even say the politician in me. Politician is often is sometimes seen as a bad word, but it is the big picture. And I guess having been in the Ministry of Finance, you tend to look at things from this macro position and what is in the best interest of the country, given your revenue position and some of your expenditure position, which you are not able to avoid. But what I got and looking, and actually going to quote you on some of it, they actually use the word for a subsidy is a non-refundable, non-repayable transfer to the current account, and it is made to public enterprises. It is also for social benefits. Guess what? Guess what it's for? Education. You could imagine it's for education. You could imagine the subsidies that we get in is to educate our children so that our children can become doctors and lawyers and actuaries and go co-start and UTT. Imagine that. That's what the subsidy being used. Ask America to do that now. Poor Biden. He's fighting for them to allow him to reduce the student debt with so many people in America and the richest country in the world. When my daughter was going to university and she was studying, and she told them that the government was paying for her education, these American kids were in shock. They said, "What? Your government is paying for your education?" She didn't even understand why were they shocked at that. Yeah, that's a subsidy. Education is a subsidy. So it's not just social.
We have to take it in its totality, because what?
But let me just sure. Finish my little bit of talk on that issue that troubles me a lot because it's brought up too often by one of your colleagues and thrown into the mix as one thing. So it's a non-refundable expenditure. You know what is a subsidy? You know what constitutes a transfer? Guess what? HSF. Yes. Because once you take it out of the consolidated fund and you put it in the HSF, subject to the rules that govern the HSF Act, it got to stay there. Of course, our Minister of Finance, which I understand he had to do that, amended the HSF Act to include contagious diseases. And the sixth of his 8 withdrawals, you know where he put it? He put it in the consolidated fund. And when he gave his mid-year review, he boasted that he took no money out of HSF. But the HSF lost nearly $1 billion in 2022. But transfers are also the transfers to HSF under the rules for the HSF. You know what else constitutes a transfer that people do not know? And this is what is amazing. Transfer a substantial percentage of capital expenditure. Yes, capital expenditure. We have the infrastructural development fund. And they said out of 2.7 billion, 57.6 of the capital funds came from the transfers, and the rest came from the consolidated fund. Because once, just like the HSF, the IDF, even if you don't spend it, you don't have to, it doesn't go back into the consolidated fund. So transfers, most of the transfers to build roads and stuff come from the transfers are from the consolidated fund. Yes, and they constitute transfers. And you heard the size? It's 30% of capital expenditure for the IDF in 2.7 billion or 57.6% of the capital funds. That's a transfer. HSF is a transfer. And guess what? Education is a subsidy.
It's a significant subsidy that the people of Trinidad and Tobago have.
Absolutely. That we have such a high level. Yes. You look on the Human Development Index. Where are we there? Yeah. I mean, give me a break. Stop just saying it as if it's one group of social benefits.
Since you put in the Human Development Index, let's ensure that the public understands what that is. The Human Development Index is an index that the United Nations essentially compiles for different countries, and it measures the level of development in the country based on a number of metrics. 3 areas: their per capita GDP, education, and health.
Can you imagine? And guess who gets flat free?
Trinidad and Tobago is ranked as having high human development. Now we can quibble on the margin because we may not often feel that way with other things like crime, etc., etc. But the fact of the matter is that over the years, because of the revenues that we've earned from the energy sector, a lot of revenues have gone into ensuring that the population of Trinidad and Tobago is by and large healthy, by and large well educated. We have a fairly high standard of education. Again, on the margin, you have some levels of illiteracy and innumeracy, but generally speaking, the government has ensured it is the law that you have to go to school. Certainly, you have to go to private school. Private school, it's the law.
And Dr. Attz, you want to know what you said? You know what you said? They broke it down in the article, and they quoted you September 2020. They said the highest transfer, which will be subsidies to households, and that is accounts for 9.5 billion. And then you said that 6.36 billion of the transfers go to the THA. Yes, the THA, the public utilities. Yes, the public utilities and local government, all of them. That is part of your subsidies that you don't want the government to give. What do you think they're doing in England?
But
Or
I
why do you
think
think they have so many problems in America?
I think the issue is that many persons don't understand these details. So which is why it's useful to have platforms. No, platforms such as this, that the average Trinbagonian could understand what sometimes is said in a budget presentation, because a budget presentation is often wrapped in all kinds of language that the average person doesn't
Economists do that. Economists do it all the time. They talk about recurrent expenditure. Well, a lot of them talk about transfer subsidies in the same breath as recurrent expenditure, which I agree it is very high. The report said between 2010 and 2020 that 50% of the annual budget went to transfers and subsidies.
Yes.
And people have to remember that and the reason why I'm so passionate about it is because I was there and I understood why the government understood what was the benefit, what was the SWOT, what was the advantage that had
of investing. Yes.
What did we have? It had cheap water and cheap electricity, which allowed us to dominate the manufacturing sector in the Caribbean, right? So when people speak, what you want to say is, and they actually were. A government is going to love me. They might tape this true. In truth, they actually, and I thought it was very excellent. They, since 2018, BPTT and Shell had entered into a partnership to build a huge solar panel farm. Why? Because number one, under the law, apparently, is you must provide electricity to households. So the idea was to replace the natural gas, which is used for generating the electricity, with the solar panel generated electricity, so that more natural gas would be available
to the
downstream industries.
That's correct.
Yeah. But they did it since 2018. But it took how many years? About 5 years. You know why? Because they couldn't get a license from this ease of doing business government. And in the meantime, the price per kilowatt of that usual tendency to delay, and I think it is deliberate. In many cases, it's deliberate. They know why, I'm sure. The cost per kilowatt of providing electricity by solar panel was now even higher than natural gas. And the reason they gave in the papers was that they could not secure a license. So that's shameful since 2018. Yes, I am still a politician.
Yes, it takes a lot. I mean, it's one of the things that we have. It's a pain point. We have to, if we're talking about investment and we're talking about transforming the economy and doing all of these things moving forward, we really have to work on the ease of doing business, because there are really just too many pain points for persons who want to either start up a business or invest in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's something.
I'm going to lead you on now, if you don't mind, unless you want to say more on that, because there were so many topics that I had in mind.
But are there any questions? Is there anyone?
Yeah, people don't call in. I don't know why. Maybe they feel, I don't know. I wish they would call in. I mean, I don't know. We're trying to talk with people's talk. And at least try, even if they don't call us, do educate maybe. I hope, which we all are educated. I am certainly. I can't talk for Dr. Attz. She's an economist. But I would say I certainly have learned a lot from days gone by and continue to do so. I'm going to turn, which is still related to the poverty issue and all of that, is the issue of inflation, which we're experiencing now, and the call by the trade unions for a minimum wage of $30. I want to hear your views on that, and what are the positives? What are the positives in your
Ladies,
view?
can I interject here?
Yeah,
we have a caller online. Could you take the call?
Oh, good. Yes,
nice.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, caller.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
I don't know if I have it clear in my head. When does the debt of a state company to the government become a subsidy? For instance, if a state company cannot pay the VAT and they owe millions of dollars in VAT, what happens to that? I listen to you off here.
Yeah, I'm gonna let As try and I'll give an answer, and then I'm going to say contingency debt, and then I hope I'm right. But I'll leave.
I'm not too sure what happens there. That's a Ministry of Finance conversation, really, because if a company, the question as I understand it is, if a company isn't able to pay debt, pay VAT, for example, and it accrues millions of dollars in VAT debt, as I understand the question. Was that your understanding of the question? At what point does the government lend support? I think the government lends support to state enterprises, not a private. So what will have to kick in will be something like a debt forgiveness. That's a different arrangement.
Or winding up.
Or winding up of the company. But the subsidy that we're talking about is state enterprises.
Yeah.
Those are agencies that essentially are government agencies supported by the government.
Salaries, paying salaries.
That's correct.
It's right. When you really talk about recurrent expenditure, sorry to interject like that, but usually when you're talking about recurring expenditure, especially whether it's a state enterprises or to government employees, you're usually talking about salaries, that which is the recurrent expenditure. So if I could think of an example, Paria. Paria is, of course, now they must be that whole thing, I'm probably going a little off track, but they probably are getting very concerned about the Dragon Field deal. I do want it to succeed because it is to the interest of the country and we will benefit from it. I'm getting a little concerned. But using Paria as an example, when they closed down Petrotrin and formed Trinidad Petroleum Limited, they could not disaggregate from the three companies, the Guaracara refinery, and from Paria, which was the one that bought the fuel, refined fuel, since we were not refining it anymore. And then you had Heritage that was exploring and producing oil. So I do know that when Paria found itself in real difficulties because they had ordered all these refined fuel, which they were selling up the islands also and supplying the local market, the fuel, jet fuel, car fuel, you name it, all the fuels, paraffin, everything, they were supplying it all. I do know that he still is, the chairman of that company, well, his letter was in the papers saying that the Minister of Finance owes Paria over $500 million in the because the price of oil and gas had gone up so much, the subsidy also increased because of that. The difference had increased. And up to now, he had not gotten it. And as a result of which, they had ships out at sea who were refusing to unload their cargo. And they had creditors who were threatening not to extend their credit to the government, and it would have impact on Heritage because they were all one company. So I think he solved the problem because I think he got his money. So to answer your question, I know like Education Facilities Limited, that was a good example. You know, you're hearing, or even down in South, I know David will know more about that than me. That is David, where are you?
I'm right here.
Yeah.
Was that in South?
Yeah. South, to fix the roads now. You remember they form of company now to fix the roads for $100,000 because they closed on Petrotrin, so they don't have bitumen.
Yes.
And they made Lake Asphalt a ward of the state, paying 2.5. So you're answering your question there. 2.5 million at least a month. They pay the workers in Lake Asphalt. So as another example, they're not closing it down, but they're paying them workers. So I guess the government makes a decision about those things. Who to close, who not to close, and who to subsidize. Not so David.
Exactly.
But getting back to the question of the minimum wage and inflation, couple of things I want to say. At 17, so the minimum wage I think was introduced somewhere back in 1990 something, 1997, 1998, and it has increased over the years. It has increased to where we are now to $17.50. And while for many of us, we know that 1750, with the increasing inflation rates, well, we use it with the fancy word inflation rate, the cost of living going up in Trinidad and Tobago, we know that 1750 an hour really is not going to help keep body and soul together for many persons. So it is not unreasonable for there to be a request for there to be an increase in the minimum wage. I don't know if $30 is the magic number, but I certainly do think that there should be some increase in the minimum wage rate to help persons who are that lower end of the spectrum kind of at least have the opportunity to deal with the rising cost of living. Now, having said that, I think there needs to be a study, there needs to be some robust research done on what, if any, has been the impact of the increasing minimum wage over the years on the inflation rate. I want to park that there as a thought. The current situation that we're facing in terms of the inflationary pressures that we're facing is as a result of what has been happening globally. So it would have started with COVID-19, when we had all of these supply chain challenges. Everything had to lock down, so you had difficulty getting access to getting food and goods and services into the country, as the case might be, and you would have had to import those things at a higher price. So that would have been the start of the inflationary pressures. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine would have exacerbated that when that started about a year ago. So the inflation that we're witnessing in Trinidad and Tobago is one that, I mean, we have our own peaks, as it were, with peaks and troughs with respect to inflation. So when it rains heavily and our farmers have challenges with their crops, you will see the food price, certainly produce and some of those prices increase. So it's a number of things happening at the same time. All of that to say, while I agree that there needs to be consideration for a better minimum wage, and I'm using better in inverted commas, I think we cannot jump to a magic figure of 30 or 40 or anything else unless we have a very clear sense of what is likely to be the domino impact, the inflationary impact of that. Let me give an example. So if I read some kind of disturbing commentary in last week's newspapers. I can't recall who the comments were attributed to, but I'll get to that in a little while. But I want to give an example. So I run a business. Let's say I run a fast food business, and I'm currently paying my workers at or near the minimum wage. And the minimum wage goes up to $30 or to whatever it increases to. I have to maintain my profit margin because that is what businesses do. They maintain their profit margin. So once the wage goes up, because by law they're going to be required to pay their workers the higher wage, they're going to pass on that higher wage to the population, either in terms of the cost of their goods, whatever goods it is, the fast food that I might be selling, I'm going to pass on that cost to the consumers. The transportation man might tell me that he has to pay his loaders more money now. He's going to increase his transportation costs. And there could be a domino effect in terms of all that one move to alleviate some of the pressure from the persons at the lower end of the spectrum could lead to a domino effect in terms of the prices of a number of things increasing. And that is going to add further inflationary pressure, further pressure on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. And as I said, while I understand the need for us to have something that is different from 1750 because it simply is hardship around the persons who are earning that level of wage. I think we can't deal with it in an ad hoc way. We need to do some studies and understand what will be the domino impact. Now, having said that, the challenge that we're facing in Trinidad and Tobago is an increasing cost of living. And I think that is what we need to address holistically and systematically. Figure out ways for us to reduce that pressure valve that is the cost of living impacting on all of us, not just persons who are earning minimum wage, but all of us in Trinidad and Tobago who are experiencing those hardships. So there was fuel price increase, all of these things, increases that added to the pressures that persons are facing in terms of their cost of living. And perhaps let us have a conversation around or do a study on, whether or not we might want to look at tweaking the rate of VAT, for example, because that is going to have a widespread impact on the population. It is going to affect government revenues in terms of VAT revenues. But when you balance it off, it could possibly be a way of easing the burden across the board, as opposed to something that could potentially cause an inflationary domino impact if you were to increase the inflationary rate. And I see you smiling there. So let the
Yeah,
conversation.
no, because I have so much I can say to what you said.
Let us get the conversation going.
Yeah, I could say so much to what you said.
Yes.
One, starting from the back and moving up, moving forward with the VAT. I have a feeling a lot of people won't, especially business community, probably won't want to buy into that too much since the government owes them so much money.
In terms of
And
VAT
in the
refunds,
mid-year,
yes.
VAT refunds. And in the mid-year review, they say, okay, we're going to pay off everybody who we owe $250,000 to, and the rest we pay bonds. So people, you holding on to my money, and people, as the manufacturing association did say, by the way, they don't talk about micro, they talk about small and medium.
Small and medium, yes.
Yeah, and a small business it employs up to, I don't want to get it wrong, I think 5 to
11.
I don't want to say
5 to 11.
it's a high number,
Yeah,
and the income is about 5 million.
But micro, we often leave out micro and micro.
But we don't even talk about them.
Yeah,
maybe they don't pay VAT. Maybe they don't make enough.
A lot of micro businesses emerged during COVID-19. The food people, this one, that.
Right, but maybe they don't pay VAT because they don't reach the margin.
Maybe the threshold.
Yes. But the point I'm trying to make with that, so the VAT, I don't think the people who already now have to pay VAT, talking about the business community, which is the engine of growth supposedly and get things going, are going to buy in too much of that. But let me start back with the minimum wage, which for whatever reason, I personally had to be educated on it. So it wasn't as though I chose to be educated on it. I was educated on it, not personally, me, Karen Nunez-Tesheira, but whatever circumstance I found myself. So the minimum wages is the Minimum Wages Act, and there's the minimum wage order that was made in 2010. Now, $17.50 per hour is the minimum, but the salary, if you work the 5 days a week, 8 hours, is not 27 or 2,800, it's a little bit over 3,000. The reason for that is because anybody who working from between $17.50 to $26.50 fall within the minimum wage band. And if you fall within the minimum wage band, you are entitled to vacation leave, sick leave, about 2 or 3 other types of leave, which will probably give you really not 27 or 2,800, but according to it was a notification from the Ministry of Labor. So I'm just saying that it comes up to over 3,000. That's the thing. But once you go over the 26.50 band, then overtime too, you also have to pay double overtime, triple, and whatever it is.
And weekends and public holidays and those
right. So when we talk about that, we have to factor that into when we talk about the 2,800. That is really part of the whole discussion. But I think the big issue from the central bank's point of view, open market operations point of view, one and the major challenge for any government and any central bank or the Federal Reserve is inflation. Inflation eats away at your purchasing power.
Well, your purchasing power, meaning how much your dollar can buy. And on that point, we have not. Well, Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago has not, as other jurisdictions, how you deal with inflation is that you increase your interest rates. Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago has not touched our repo rate.
And I'll tell you why they have given the reason they've given. Because I guess I read the economic bulletin. Yes, I do. Just to let people understand, because, sometimes people use these terms and, they just talk about the repo rate. That's repo rate is the repo rate of this government, which is 3.50%.
3.50,
and has remained so for the last few years. And people wonder, why isn't the central bank increasing the repo rate? And the reason for that is this. Number one, a lot of times the ways that the central bank helps to manage the economy along with the fiscal policies of the government is to manage inflation. Because once inflation gets out of hand, your purchasing power goes through the roof, and then you're talking about recession and all the terrible things.
You're going to have a $1,000 bill because
you're right. So what?
$20 bill or $5 bill will have no value,
and it's happening all over the world. So what they try to do is which is what the Fed in America did, because they have what they call demand pull inflation, which is after COVID, with all the demand supply chain management thing and Ukraine thing, that over now a long time, the Americans can't spend enough. They can't.
Well, one of the reasons for that is because the United States, they printed money, to help
Yeah, but they did that
stimulate.
recently.
No,
The
they've
3 point
no, no,
something
no, they,
trillion
no,
dollars.
no, they printed money in 2020 to try to stimulate the economy. So they
Right.
printed money to try to get people, and that is what has fueled their inflation. So there was a lot of
Right.
money in
But
circulation, and that essentially, when you have a lot of money in circulation, but you don't have sufficient goods and services, the price of the goods and services goes up, and that is where the inflation started
okay,
to creep, as it were. That demand pull that you're talking about.
okay, but it is also I am not an economist, but it is also a fact that, and this is reflected in the in the Federal Reserve getting very worried about the unemployment rate being so low. And they said in the last month, 366,000 jobs were created, and you think they'd be happy like Pappy, but they're not happy like Pappy. They're not happy like Pappy because there is too much liquidity. There's too much money circulating. And if there's too much money circulating, that means I have money to spend on things. The things will go up, and it's a recurring cycle. And I want to address the Trinidad situation because I remembered when you at Williams, when the economy, which it probably was right, maybe to say the economy was overheating in 2008, which was the best year in terms of performance on all the macroeconomic indicators. We had reached 10 point something percent in inflation rates, first time in years. And he said we were going on a slippery slope. But if you notice in the last how many years, our inflation rate has even been 1.6%, 0.6%.
Very
You know
low.
why? No, that's about 10 years. I went and wrote it down. I mean, I'm going to speak badly. I forgot to say, I just write down my stuff, right? I wrote it down, 0.6. And do you know why? Because we have cost push inflation. Nobody spending any money. Nobody, consumer confidence is zero. When you have a minister of finance who can never get the fiscal position right, who always overstating the revenue by much and the expenditure always every single year, even last year, he couldn't get it right. You cannot rely on it. The chamber said you cannot rely on it. And you know what economies depend on? Confidence. And if you don't have confidence in what the government through the Minister of Finance is saying to you, you're not going to buy a house. You're not going to buy this. You're not going to buy that. And this is the reason the central bank has given. They have given as a reason, the reason why they have not increased the repo rate, because you would want to mop up liquidity. You want to mop up excess cash in the system, because then that fuels inflation and all the things that America is dealing with. We're not dealing with that. We have an inflation rate. When you do headline and core inflation, we have an inflation rate that went up to 9% in 2022. Is now about 6 something percent, right? The food inflation, Dr. Roger Hossain, from 2015 to now, food has gone up by 40 something percent.
That's correct.
Right. So what I am saying to you is, it is an anomaly. You cannot have an economy that is doing zero and have such a high inflation rate. It means that what you're experiencing is cost push inflation, because that is inconsistent.
We're importing those prices, and that is what is fueling the inflation.
Right, but what I'm trying to say to the man in the street, when you see that inflation rate for the last 10 years ago, there was so low, 1%, 2%. That is a reflection of the state of the economy. So the central bank did not want it. The repo rate is the lending rate that banks and financial institutions lend to each other overnight when they are short of cash. And the central bank sets the repo rate. Yeah. And therefore, when those banks
is determined by that, yes.
Right. So when those banks come in to lend to you and me as consumers, they're not going to charge you 3.5. So that is the kind of the thing. So unlike United States, they are fighting up with so much cash in the system that the Fed keeps on raising it by, it's called basis points. It's down 5.25. And so the real reason
they skipped the last increase.
Okay, but that's good. I didn't see that. But I just want people to understand that the inflation rate in Trinidad is high for an economy that's doing nothing, where the reserve requirement, the bank requires you to have a certain amount of cash kept just in case, to make sure you can meet your liabilities. They reduce the amount you have to keep because you know why? They're trying to get money in the system. They have no money in the system. There's no confidence except for the banks and insurance companies. The not normal consumer not buying. That is why they leave it at 3.50, and that because your inflation rate is being pushed by food and mostly by food, because we're importing all our food.
So I want to come back to get some clarification from you on something. So the $30, I want to come back to the
Yes,
minimum.
$30.
Explain that to me, how it falls within the band of the 1750 and the 26. Is it that
No,
the
it would not.
$30?
It would
Is
not.
it that they want the ban to be
To
extended?
change. I think they wanted to start at $30 instead, and I don't know what the ban would be. But I didn't know this before, Don't think I knew this before.
I didn't know this before.
No, I didn't know this before. We found out our
conversations the union should bring to the population, so that the population understands these.
But we didn't understand that as employee. We were employers, I'm telling you, and we thought, I wouldn't say how much, but it was significantly more than 1750.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't realize under the Minimum Wages Order Act and if you go to the Ministry of Labor, they have the notice.
Mm-hmm.
Once the minimum wage can go up to $26.50 an hour,
mm-hmm.
it means that you have to pay overtime, you have to pay vacation leave, you have to pay sick leave, and all those things. But if you go to $27, you take yourself outside the minimum wage order. And therefore, all those things, overtime and triple time, will no longer apply. But people don't know that.
So if it goes to 30, you're saying that none of these things will apply. But I imagine that
they'll have to take an order.
The order will be amended.
Right, and if the order is amended, they will have to create a band.
Yes.
And obviously, the band they want to start at is $30 and not at $17.50.
All right. Now, one of the comments I saw last week, when immediately after the Labor Day celebrations and the announcement of this $30, was someone saying that this will then open the way for business people to look for migrant workers, because they can pay them.
Thank you, Jesus.
They can pay them cheaper wages, and I found that was an unfortunate statement. That was a yes. Why would you want to essentially exploit migrant workers simply because you can?
No. You know what you should be saying, Dr. Attz, and that's your colleague too. Every minute talk about them Venezuelans and regulated Venezuelans. But let me tell you something. He must tell me, if 2 weeks pass and you don't hear about a Venezuelan either in a club, in a casino, they're being exploited, it is true, but I suspect, some of them may be tricked into coming here to work as helpers, and then they find themselves working in these clubs. That may be true, but they're here with their guns. I'm
separating the two issues. I know there is.
No, I cannot, because the migrant workers that come from Dominica, Grenada, and Guyana is a different animal than the Venezuelans.
I am dealing with all migrant workers. I'm not dealing with Venezuelans.
All right. When you finish, I'll deal with Venezuelans.
No. I'm dealing with all migrant workers. I'm not dealing with Venezuelans, because I agree with you. You seem to be focused on one set of migrant workers without understanding.
Because that is the focus that I hear all the time.
We have Caribbean brothers and sisters who, in fact, the Minister of CARICOM, the Minister of Foreign Affairs recently said that there was an adjustment to the persons who can come into Trinidad to work, barbers, hairdressers, etc., etc., etc. That's a different conversation. But when I say migrant, I mean the totality of the migrant population.
Okay.
Not a specific set of persons.
Okay. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an interesting conversation. I think that there is a need for greater clarity. So I certainly didn't know the part about the order that you mentioned, and I think there is an opportunity for our unions to bring that kind of information. So maybe you could invite them so that they can explain.
Yes, I will.
So that they can explain the ban and what the implications are. But even with that explanation, I think it's important for us to do some research on what will be the likely impact and how we can mitigate those impacts.
Yeah, and I'm going to help ask you now just want to comment on what you just said before we move on the unemployment and what you brought up, which I found was extraordinarily interesting in an article that you wrote about what structural adjustment policies, and I'll let you talk about it. But let me just say this thing about the migrant workers. We would be fooling ourselves if we do not know it is the Venezuelans. They say there are about 70,000 unregulated Venezuelans in Trinidad.
There was
Why are the Venezuelans?
this evening in the news report, I missed it. The Power 102 news report, they said that the Minister of National Security was quoting a number. I don't know if David is able to get that information because I missed what he was saying, what the newscaster was saying.
Okay, but there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them because I could walk on my house. I could stay right where I'm living and there are Venezuelans right in my building working as helpers. Okay, so I don't even have to leave my building to know that. And I could walk down in St. James and only things. So I'm not going to argue that point because you really made a good point. We are dealing with our data and you cannot manage what you can't measure. But I could think I can measure that there has been a general acceptance that we have a significant increase in thing. And the reason why I take such strong objection to it, if I may say so, I am not talking about the regulated Venezuelan. There are many good Venezuelans, many good migrant. The mentality of a migrant is not to come in your country to do worse. They come in your country to do better, but that's part of the problem. Right. But that is part of the problem. And if you want to close your eyes, even the Prime Minister in the early days, I give him clap for that. But he had a reason for doing that. He did not want to say that Venezuelans coming here were refugees, because to say that would mean that they were escaping political persecution. And you couldn't say that because then he'd be going against Maduro and he'd drag everything. So I give him right not to have said that. He said, no. They're not refugees. Trinidad is a small country. Why don't they go to countries with huge land spaces? They have countries with huge land spaces. They can go there. Why are they coming to small little Trinidad? But I'll tell you why I have a problem with them. I have a problem because 1, they're not CARICOM members. 2, they're not English speaking. 3, the guns and drugs that come in our country, the guns and drugs that fuel the cocaine trade and the crime that you see acted out in this country come from Colombia and Venezuela, from which these people come. They're not coming from Haiti. They're not coming from Dominica. They're not coming from St. Vincent. They're not coming from Guyana. But even Guyana have a problem with the drugs. But right now, we are a transit point, and the United States has said that. They said that they cut off the artery of transporting the cocaine on land by interventions. Then, so now they turn, the Express had an article talking about the amount of drugs. They said, how could you have the Coast Guard, the Army, an army, I don't know what you call it, enemy, not the whole army, or maybe the whole army is based there, but it's all of those things. And so much drugs are passing through Trinidad and Tobago. And the Venezuelans are bringing it. I read an article in Bloomberg, go back and read in Bloomberg, where they said this reporter went down to Caracas. He said they had a small boat but belonging to the custom. And by the way, I was the minister with the Revenue Authority. I was the one dealing with customs. And one of the main problems we were trying to deal with was the drug trade. So please give me I am very strong on it. And they're coming here. And I got very annoyed with some people who I was out with. I went to 2 different places. These Venezuelan girls, I have nothing against you, but go back home. You're coming in here, you cannot speak English, right? You cannot speak English, but you have the long curly hair and you have the bright color skin. Don't tell me if it was Haitians, they would have the same attitude. They would not. They cannot even, you ordering something, they can't even understand what you're saying. They're scowling up their face for you. They're going in your accident emergency, using your accident emergency and using up your CDAP, not contributed to NIS and undercutting the 1750. Because the boss who hiring them is not reporting that he's not paying NIS, and they're certainly not reporting NIS. So what you are doing is bringing a problem into this country that we need to solve. And it is not solving it by allowing this continuous march of people who, when you weigh the pros and cons, it is not good for the development of Trinidad and Tobago. And for people to sit down there and want to defend that position, I wonder if when the Dominicans had their big hurricane, their CARICOM, their whole country nearly got wiped away. You ever heard any Bacchanal Dominicans? Not one day. But these people in this country, every other 2 weeks, you're hearing who dancing in who have unlicensed guns, who involved in drugs, who involved in fights. Why are we importing that problem into our country? They are not from the CARICOM. They are not part of us.
Well,
Biden has eased up on them. Let them go home.
I'm hearing you, but there's also a humanitarian responsibility.
Yeah, but let's go back home.
No, there's a humanitarian responsibility that Trinidad and Tobago has. You said it at the start. You said it at the start of your conversation.
Diatribe.
that Venezuela is our partner, and for strategic reasons, we have to provide.
Yeah, what is our partner? No, Petro-Carib.
That is they are neighbors. All right. There are neighbors, and for strategic.
Yeah, you better say neighbors because no, Dr. Attz, I cannot let you get away with that.
No.
Because Mr. Manning.
No, I corrected it. Petro-Carib.
No, I want to correct you even more because Venezuela set up Petro-Carib, and he set up Petro-Carib for all the CARICOM countries to buy their oil from them. At 1%, and that is why Mr. Manning set up as well. So why I must want to help out Venezuela?
Are they not our neighbors? And where's the dragon gas?
Yeah, but I have plenty of other neighbors too. Suriname, all these countries are my neighbors.
Yes,
listen.
But so the drag. I'm saying for geopolitical reasons, we have to be strategic. I hear you. There is a burden, and there's an ongoing conversation about access to healthcare, access to education.
NIS. Undercutting people's salaries.
Cost of everything, yes. And there is also the question of their labor.
And they're getting all the jobs in the anytime you want to be a waitress, you better be a Venezuelan. Can't speak English, you know. That don't matter. That's not what you're supposed to do.
No, but who is encouraging?
Who is doing that? Well, who exactly?
No, when I say
who is doing that? But when you defending them and not wanting to separate them from other immigrants, you are defending them too.
No, but my conversation is not about Venezuela.
Dr.
Brought it there. No, I said migrant workers. You were the one who.
I know. I heard you. But I heard you.
And I say migrant workers because.
But Dr. Attz, be frank. If you said to any Trinidadian walking down the road right now, who is a migrant worker in Trinidad? 9 out of 10 will tell you Venezuelan. Tell me if I'm telling the truth.
You're correct, but the onus is.
Therefore, so stop. Don't use that euphemism of migrant workers. Let's talk straight. Venezuelans in this country, go home. Go home. You're not paying NIS. They're not paying NIS. NIS is nearly bankrupt. They are not paying NIS. NIS is nearly bankrupt. And that will bring me to the unemployment point because we talk about labor force participation. It's at the lowest level in Trinidad that it has ever been in years. Do you think it is? Well, I'll let you explain what labor force participation is and how we reach our unemployment level 4.7. And you cannot tell me that all those Venezuelans working in every shop in our circular mall, working in every casino, and working in all of those bars are not contributing to the issue of labor force participation, which leads to the unemployment looking so low. So you go ahead and explain labor force participation.
Well, I can't explain the Venezuelan side of it, but certainly, so let me be clear. You're absolutely correct that there's been a lot of displacement of local labor by migrant labor, predominantly Venezuelan labor. All right, we're absolutely correct on that. But I think it's important for us to understand why. So there is the what should I put it? The bias that some people have because of how Venezuelans look. And that is a Trinbagonian bias. These are our citizens deciding that they have a preference for certain kinds of workers as opposed to other kinds of workers. The Venezuelans themselves can't be blamed for that. It's Trinbagonians.
And they do work hard, many of them.
For displaying those biases. Two, it is suggested that they tend to work hard. I'm not saying that there is not the negative side of it in terms of the illegal activities that range from, prostitution to gun running to drugs and all of these things. But what is the system that we have in place? So when we say that a Venezuelan or a migrant can be registered, and I think the article was about Venezuelan, the news report that I heard earlier on was about Venezuelan migrants. When we say they can be registered, what comes with that registration? What's the migrant policy that we have in Trinidad and Tobago now? When they're registered, that means that they're eligible to work. And if they're eligible to work, are they eligible to pay NIS? What is the system that we have in place for them?
Right. Well, what I'm saying, Dr. Attz, and I guess I get passionate about it because, I don't really think the conversation is really against Venezuelans. I don't have anything against Venezuelans at all, but I have something for my country. And when you talk about migrant, that is the story of that is about America's built on migrant labor, the mentality of a migrant. I remember went to Greece for a month. And when I was there, the people were Greeks. And they were complaining bitterly about the Eastern Europeans coming to Greece and taking the jobs. Why? Because they were prepared like the Mexicans in America. It's a story of the world. You leave your country, you leave your country as a migrant, and therefore you are willing to undercut. You're not studying that you're hurting the people who live there. We are a small country, we're not America. We're not a powerful, rich country. Right? We can't even, we have fiscal deficit after fiscal deficit after fiscal deficit. Our GDP, our debt to GDP is in 70%, and is going into recurrent expenditure. Right? Why are you picking on us? Because you're using us to pass your drugs, and don't tell me that's not what you're doing, because the Americans just got, America, not the Trinidadians, Americans just intercepted $134 million, I think US, of cocaine that was coming in into Trinidad. I think it was being loaded in a car in Chagaramas, right? And there's very little manning of that area where the drugs are supposedly coming into the country. So when you see me taking this position, it's really not against Venezuelans, It is against the crime in my country and in our country that is being facilitated by allowing the passage of the Venezuelans coming from Colombia with drugs. And you cannot tell me that is not true. There was a right. No, you don't have to have it. Look at what the acting controller of customs, when she went before the Joint Select Committee, said that for months now the containers were passing through and were not being they were not working. They were not working. They were coming in and coming out. Not only did she say that, she also said there are 19 manual bays to do manual checks and only 3 people assigned to the manual. Give me a break. Don't tell me the Venezuelans are the Dominicans. Don't tell me the Venezuelans are the Vincentians. Don't tell me they are the country from which the drugs pass through to Europe and North America. And I was telling you about a Bloomberg article. The Bloomberg article said that there was one small little, you can go and read it yourself, a Bloomberg article, a reporter had come down, and they said there was one little a Coast Guard boat looking on nonchalantly while the drugs were coming in and out of the country, right? So don't tell me, and then they know where to hide and where to go. Why are you importing a problem? You have enough problems. Your crime rate is over 600 last year, and most of it being with unlicensed guns, gangs, and narcotics. And you are bringing into this country the very persons. I remember Gary Griffith saying, which I applauded him for that. He said the head of one of the top, the top sounds so good, one of the leading gangs in Venezuela, most powerful, most brutal gangs in Venezuela. Their leader was hiding out in Point 14 and he was killed in Trinidad. What more proof do you need that you do not need to import more? Let us fix our problems and then let us be able to invite you into the country like all other civilized countries do. You think you can't just walk into Canada like that?
So Karen, based on what you've said, how do you're saying that the crime situation in Trinidad today, because I think it's a nice segue, you're saying that the crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago is as a result of the influx of Venezuelan migrants?
No. You must, no. Right. I did not say that. I did not say that. I said the crime situation in Trinidad, at the base of the crime situation in Trinidad is the cocaine trade. When I was in government, Martin Joseph was the minister. He had to deal with the anti-money laundering and poker and all of that. I had to deal with FIU. I had to put in my piece. He explained it very well to the country. And you could go to Hansard. You could read what Colin Imbert had to say when Kamala passed a partial state of emergency. And he said, oh, you pass a partial state of emergency, so all the resources will be in one place, so the drugs, which everybody knows, the drugs coming from Venezuela, so they can pass through. So everybody knows that. So I am saying the base of the crime in this country is the drugs and licensed guns in this country. That's where the gangs have proliferated. There's no question about it. Where are they coming from? Colombia and Venezuela. How are they being? They're facilitated, obviously, by people in government, police, etc. No question about it. But that's where it's coming from. There's no question about it. The persons who you see shooting out on the streets with the guns, it's like you want to have your husband killed. I hope you have no husband. But I hope you don't want to have your husband killed. But anyway, you want to have your husband killed, but you don't want to pull the trigger. You get a trigger man.
So you hire them out.
You hire a trigger man. You pay him $5,000. You sit down in your nice house in Goodwood Park or Westmoreland or San Fernando, wherever you live in, anywhere, any nice suburban area, smoking your cigar and drinking your Johnny Walker Blue. You're not out there. You're not out there. You didn't pull a gun. You sit down there. But guess who gave the order to pull that gun? You. And guess who go to jail if they catch you and that you pull it to kill your husband? You and the trigger man. So I'm trying to tell you, I am not against the Venezuelans. I am saying that's where the drugs are coming from.
And
that
I am
is
saying,
at the
and
root.
I'm adding my own corollaries that we have to manage it. It's a humanitarian.
Of course, I manage it. Don't let them in.
We have to manage it. Well,
Yeah, you know what you need?
I think that opportunity has passed. So we have to manage what is on our shores right now.
You can't do that.
I think we have to manage it.
Dr. Attz, if I took that attitude, you know, Germany will be still under Nazi rule. You cannot think like that. You cannot even begin to think like that. No, because you can't even give yourself the luxury of thinking what you have to do. You know what you do? Do what Barbados did. They created a partnership with Interpol. Why doesn't the government don't go after the big drug lords? They'll spend 20 years frustrating you with the money they have, right? And die before they ever see a day in jail. You disrupt the trade. They did it already. Let Interpol, all of these groups come into the and partner with you to deal and disrupt the drug trade.
But you know, you're contradicting something you said earlier because David Rudder said it and you just repeated it in different ways. David Rudder said somebody letting the cocaine pass, so why would you want to disrupt that?
Well, that's why you have to ask yourself, then, do we have the right people there? Because I can say, when I was in government, yes, I'm sorry to put it that way, and which is why I feel strongly about this. The FIU, we were bringing in fun. I've said it so many times, I get tired of saying it. We were not letting a Trinidadian or a Caribbean person think. The Washington people came down to me and we said, okay, we're bringing somebody from Central America who had a proven track record who had up the FIU. SORT was going to work in conjunction with them. We were going to set up a special unit of the DPP where they would be trained in money laundering, white collar crime, train them abroad, have people come here and ring fence them in a separate department away from the rest of the normal crime that we talk about. We also were dealing with the gambling, which is a means of money laundering and also financing, terrorist financing.
But I saw in the newspaper that you mentioned gambling. I saw them advertised for the head of the gaming commission.
Oh God, Dr. Attz. Dr. Attz, you're talking to a politician here.
But
okay?
This is why I'm asking you.
Okay, so let me tell you. Let me just tell you this, okay? Let me just say this. Number one, the gambling legislation, which we had proposed to bring, anti-TRA, which we did pass in the lower house and then Mr. Manning called elections, it required a 3/5 majority. At the time, we had the 3/5 majority, which is why the pressure was on to pass those two pieces of legislation. The current iteration of both of those pieces of legislation do not require a special majority. And what they have done, so to answer that question, this current version of the gambling which up to now they have not passed it and made it, proclaimed it and implemented it, because that's what they do. They will assent, but they won't proclaim and they won't implement. You remember the that act, Procurement Act?
Procurement Act.
You remember that? I remember I had Mr. Lalman on my show about 3 weeks ago, and he's the one who told me the two key provisions, Section 7 and Section 20. One dealing with procurement of goods and the other one dealing with disposal of state property, state lands, had not been proclaimed, which means they were not law. Thursday, they passed it. But then they did not renew his contract in January. So right now we don't have a procurement regulator. Wake up and smell the coffee. So what they do, what they do and what this government does, they have to understand. They know that they will say from the beginning. You know how long Minister Imbert has been talking about the TTRA. And by the way, the TTRA, look at what they did to take it out of the 3/5 majority. The key part, which that is what we were concerned with, it was the drugs. It was the drugs we were concerned with, the customs section. And what by having the revenue authority, we kind of outside the control of the public service, the hiring, firing, disciplining, seniority, all that crap. We had what you call the enforcement division would be subject to the revenue authority board. They would also have to do special, you just couldn't be in that department just like that, like SORT. You also had to do the lie detector and the drug testing. You know what they did? Every other department, the Revenue Authority, falls under the Revenue Authority Board, which is governed by the minister. They have to go to him. But guess the enforcement section, it's still under the public service. Yeah, that's your government for you. Yeah, that's their government for you. And the gambling, you know what they did? Oh, you know what they did too with the gambling, which I talked about already? The thing they did with the gambling, which is, of course, the element of surprise. If you know that somebody give you a call to tell you that the police, first of all, the police cannot, under their version, you cannot enter into a casino or private members club without permission. You have to ask permission. If they deny you permission, you have to go to a magistrate.
And get a warrant.
To get. Guess what disappeared? All the evidence that you're looking for. Yes. And now they're talking about, it's 8 years now, they're telling about that commission. Procurement, I want to know where the procurement regulated. You know, just think. Just think. And the helicopters they had, all of them are down. How we found out? Because they went looking for somebody and they had to borrow a helicopter. The OPVs, I think it's about 20 OPVs, 14 of the OPVs out of commission have not been fixed. The radar system, inoperable. Make you wonder. Yeah? Make you wonder.
So the issue is not really the Venezuelan migrants. It's the issue that we don't have systems in place to manage. We don't have systems in place to manage the influx.
No. The issue is that part of the whole setup. This is an organization. Who do you want? You want certain different levels of employees. You want the ones that go down the street and kill. But you want the ones who are going to get your product and bring in your product and so on. And who best to do that than the person from the country from where they grow it? So it's all part of a scheme. It's all part of thing. And it's not unreasonable to say that. And by the way, the dragon field thing looked like it's not working out because I wanted to work out there. But Maduro is looking at Eni in Italy and Repsol in Spain to sell his natural gas. He's selling them, and guess what? Why will he want to sell natural gas to Trinidad when Biden said they're giving it 2 years provisional lease and you cannot pay in cash? Why? Why would Mr. Maduro waste his time when he gets so much allegedly theft from his own Minister of Energy, who was sending shiploads of oil to the Middle East and getting money which he kept for himself? Why would he worry with us?
But you know, that is not a good thing for Trinidad and Tobago. If indeed that is what is happening, that the dragon will not be dancing, that is not a good thing for Trinidad and Tobago, because a lot of what the government has, is heavily
Bent
dependent on
over.
access. They're heavily dependent on access to the gas from the Dragon field for downstream operations. So if indeed that is true, then that doesn't augur well for us.
A day in politics is a lifetime. And I did agree with the Prime Minister and I did say it on this show, that when people were criticizing him for the position he took with the Venezuelans initially, I said, you have to understand, Maduro has the Dragon field, and the Dragon field has how much trillions of
Cubic feet of
gas.
gas.
And that gas is supposed to go to the hibiscus platform. I think it's the hibiscus platform. And then it goes downstream, and they want to go further downstream. And the Lauren Manatee project, even though they separated both, but Kevin Ramnaram, who I had on my show already, said even when Manatee starts producing in 2028, it still won't be enough to meet our needs. So we are suffering from price and production. We don't have oil, but we have had a refinery. And I don't know why people always talk only about how little oil we had. In about 10 years ago, we produced about 114,000 barrels per day. The last 3 years is between 57 and 58,000.
50 something, yeah, that's right. We started at 200 plus. Back in the 70s, we started at 200.
Right, but I mean, within the last thing was 100. But people have to understand,
down to 50 something.
What they have to understand is that we always imported crude oil and refined it. That's why it's called a refinery.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I have said it on this show that they are about now building over 200. I read another article that said, and I think it's Forbes, 450 new oil refineries, either new refineries or refurbishing them. And that's what Venezuela is doing. So Venezuela is selling the oil to Colombia because they got the green light. They're selling the oil to Eni and Repsol, the natural gas. And why will they worry with us with the non-disclosure agreement, which Maduro said he's going to look through every single one of them, because every single one of them are subject to his review. I'm not saying anything about the one that we did. I'm just saying that's stall things more. But why would they agree to when they are, as you like to tell me about these migrants and they're suffering so much? If they're suffering so much, the quicker they get money and cash to pay for things, the better. Why you want to go and do business with little in Trinidad and Tobago when you have the rest of the world eager to buy and will pay for you in cash? And now countries now, in order to, which you would know, weaken the power of the IMF, are trading in their own currencies. Brazil, right? Brexit countries, right?
Brazil, Russia,
Brexit,
India,
Southeast Asian countries, right?
But you're raising a serious issue there, because Trinidad and Tobago has always built our fortunes and essentially relied extremely heavily on the oil and gas sector. And I remember when the Prime Minister made the announcement about the access to the Dragon field, et cetera, and the need for delicate negotiations, it's diplomatically sensitive, et cetera. That doesn't augur well for Trinidad and Tobago's future, sustainable development, if what you are in fact saying is correct. I mean, I don't know. I just take these details based on, what you see in the newspapers, and sometimes I might get some additional information. But if it is that we are running fiscal deficits, production is down in terms of both oil and gas in Trinidad and Tobago. We were hoping to get this gas from Dragon Field so that it could help with the downstream activities, lead to employment, etc., greater economic activity. Then we really, all of our eggs are in that basket, and we therefore run the risk of not being able to realize the kind of economic growth that we say we want to have. The IMF said 2.3, 3 point something in 2024. Not too sure how they arrived at that, but how are we going to?
They were 5.5 last year.
And they revised
and they got it wrong.
Yeah, they got it wrong. They revised it. I mean, I still think the 3 point something was when you're running all of these negative rates of growth all of these years. But what you're suggesting there is that we're not going to realize any returns from Dragon anytime soon, if at all.
Well, what I want to say is, and I genuinely mean it, I mean, you could talk politics, you could do that, but you have to love your country, yeah?
No, this
And
is a serious thing, and that's why I'm raising it.
yeah. So I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to say to you that if you had Kevin Ramnarine on the show, and whenever I give you data, I try to get it from either CSO or from the central bank. I go to central bank, I go to CSO, right? And then I go to Kevin Ramnarine too. In any event, you don't, and you go to the budgets. So to answer your question, if you can see, we already are in serious trouble. That's why the fiscal deficit is where it is going to be. That is why that's why, as I was speaking about the debt to GDP, as you said, the debt is a function of the amount of money we own, or based on how much money we
earn. Yes.
owe. No, the debt
How much we
is
owe
based on how much we have earned.
That's
okay?
right. That's what, yeah.
Right. Okay. So what I'm saying is, the minister, this is part of the lack of trust, because I actually read it on the Expressway, explained it, so people, not only me reading, all the economists and all of them reading it, everybody who wants to know can read too, right? What he did is the Prime Minister of Finance gave the impression that we had expected in 2022 to have a much higher rate of debt to GDP, because nobody knew what was going to happen in 2022. The price of oil and gas went way up there and so on. And that, in fact, it was the percent, what it represented as a percent of our debt was something like, I think it came down to 70% or less than 70%, right? Which was far less than was anticipated. And then he went to 2021 and he said in 2021, our debt to GDP was much higher. So we actually brought down the debt to GDP. But you know what he forgot to say? If you have 10 apples, and of the 10 apples, you're owing for 8 of those apples.
You're owing 5, precisely.
Going for 5. We're going for 5 of those apples in 2021, right? Right? And then in 2022, you have 20 apples and you're only owing for 5. What's supposed to happen? And your debt as a percentage of your GDP is going to be reduced and nothing to do with you. In fact, when they look at the raw figures, the increase, the debt went up by 2.8 or 2.9 billion in 2022. But he don't talk about that, He talk about how great they did. Had nothing to do with them. So to answer your question, if we ain't really in trouble, which is why in the last, oh God, I realized I really wanted you to talk about your wonderful, I want to let you talk about this because I think it's really interesting, structural adjustment and us formulating our own structural adjustment program. Could you talk a little bit more about it? You didn't?
We jump off of one thing.
Yeah, because you only have 8 minutes. We only have 5 minutes, 7 minutes. So I would love to hear you.
I think it's a natural segue because what is happening is that all of what we earn in Trinidad and Tobago primarily comes from the energy sector. So the money, the revenue that goes to the government comes primarily from the energy sector. And, just as you have been saying, there has been volatility in terms of those revenues. We got a little kind of bly last year because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The prices went up, so we got some extra revenue. But production is down, and the Minister of Finance has been himself admitting that production is significantly down. And from time to time, you will hear him say that things are grave, and then he will come back and say things not looking so bad. So sometimes, it's a little confusing to follow. But the fact is that production is down in Trinidad and Tobago. And if it is that we are challenged in terms of access to the gas, it means that is going to be further compromised. Now, that paints, I think, a lovely picture, and again, lovely in inverted commas, because it says that we cannot continue managing our economy with all of this volatility, which is external to us. We have no control over this volatility that we're experiencing. So we cannot continue to manage our economy. So when I spoke about the need for us to have structural adjustment.
Could you explain what structural adjustment is? Because a lot of people hate it.
And I think when I say structural adjustment, we have to reimagine, we have to re-envisage Trinidad, the structure of Trinidad and Tobago's economy. So you have oil and gas. And yes, we're trying to get as much out of the oil and gas sector as possible, but it is clear to us that that is not sustainable. So we have to figure out what other areas we can use to help us earn foreign exchange, because there's plenty foreign exchange that we used to be getting from the oil and gas sector to run our country. What other sectors there are? So there is some manufacturing. What incentives we need to put in place? We spoke earlier on about the ease of doing business. There has to be some way in which we align what I call industrial policy in terms of how we look at different industries and different sectors. We have to align our fiscal policy in terms of how we manage our revenues and our expenditures. And we have to align that with our monetary policy as well, in terms of how much money we have into the system and how much money we use to import goods and services, et cetera, when we're not earning the same levels of foreign exchange. Added to all of that, I also think that there has to be a reform in terms of our education system to undergird this structural adjustment, as I'm calling it. Meaning, essentially, if we are changing the nature of the economy, what kinds of skills are we going to need to help fuel that economy moving forward? And what systems we need to put in place today? What systems need to be put, what adjustments need to be made to our education system today to allow our citizens, to allow us to have the kind of human capital that can help the economy move forward? Because to replace the revenues or displace the revenues from the energy sector with other sectors in Trinidad and Tobago requires a lot of work. Billions, hundreds of billions of dollars have been earned from this sector, which we realize is not sustainable anymore, because sometimes we make money. So we got a little extra last year because of, as I said, President Putin and the president of Ukraine. That was the only reason we got that. But as you correctly said, we have debts outstanding. So we need to have a steady, sustainable source of income. And we need to begin the conversation about what sectors will allow us to realize those kinds of revenues so that we can keep our economy afloat, because everything is dependent on the oil and gas sector. And yes, we have to use the revenues that we're earning in the oil and gas sector to finance ourselves into and to build other sectors in the country. And
give me an example.
I think that has been well, the manufacturing sector.
But the manufacturing sector will use natural gas.
It's not going to.
And they use the water and electricity, which uses natural gas.
It's not going to be sufficient. There have been conversations around tourism outside of Carnival.
Thank you.
We see tourism as Carnival. That cannot be sustainable, particularly when Carnival it's a leakage. We're importing more goods and services for Carnival than we actually produce.
That's right.
Income is not being earned. The foreign exchange is not staying in Trinidad and Tobago. We're using the foreign exchange that we're earning to buy more foreign exchange for Carnival. So we have to find ways to make Carnival sustainable and income generating. So bring it back to a space where the value added resides in Trinidad and Tobago as opposed to residing elsewhere. So there's the tourism sector, there is the vision.
Agro-industry.
Absolutely. We're having
steel band. People make plenty money selling steel bands,
We're having circular conversations around the agriculture sector. When we have plenty money, we import.
Chocolate.
When we don't have, we're talking about.
No. Dr. Attz, only because I don't have time, but I really want to tell you that if we were to have more time, I would tell you why we importing. You understand who controlling this country? Once you understand who controlling this country and why we have my little grandson yesterday, by way of thing, I told him I will never go to a particular coffee place. By Sean calling name, you know what I'm talking about. He said, Gran, why won't you go? And he persisted in asking. He's very intelligent, 10 years of age. I said, okay, Zane, if you insist on me telling you why, let me tell you why. Because you using up my foreign exchange to bring in a franchise into this country.
Scarce foreign exchange.
Scarce foreign exchange to bring in a franchise into this country, right? And you have to pay whoever grant you the franchise, whatever royalties back in US dollars.
Foreign currency.
Right? Yeah. There's a dead end, no end jobs for you to go nowhere and stay on minimum wage. And that is why your grandmother is telling you she never ever went there to have coffee, because I am never going to do that. And how this government can allow 4 and 5 of those franchises in this country, where instead of focusing on developing our chocolate and our cocoa and our coffee and so on, you are allowing them, and you could go in the bank and get $200. You have to run around unless you know somebody. And the chicken, billions of dollars they're making, paying next to nothing salaries, dead end jobs, using up your foreign exchange and my foreign exchange, for which you are getting next to nothing benefit from. And people are encouraging that nonsense in this country.
But there is a demand. The population demands.
Yes, there's a demand for cocaine too. The demand. Listen, why you going chicken and the egg? Chicken and the egg. We have Royal Castle.
The point I'm making is that we need to educate our population so that they understand. Have the conversations that we need.
But you know what? They do not want you to understand because they like it just so. Just so. They like it just so. Anyway, we have to leave at 6 o'clock. Dr. Attz, I'm sure you never thought that you met anyone like me in a long while. I'm sure you never met anyone like me in a long while.
No, I have not.
No, you have not. And you're being kind.
It was an exhilarating conversation, I must admit. It was an exhilarating conversation.
Oh, you are so kind.
It was not the normal sanitized conversation, very
no.
polite, that sort of thing.
But I'm not going to be polite.
It was a real conversation about.
Oh God, thank you. And you were wonderful, and you were very patient with me, because somebody else was telling me, why doesn't she shut up and let the guests speak?
But it was a pleasure being here. It was really.
And I have to have you back again. But next time, you have to let us see you. So
Absolutely.
go and fix up, because it's not fair.